Welcome to an India Today special broadcast that comes to you from the West Bank, the Palestinian West Bank. I'm Gaurav Sawant. There is tremendous tension in this part of the area. Now, this is Palestinian territory, and the Israeli forces have moved in a big way in the past 24 hours. At least 70 suspected Hamas fighters have been taken into custody in the West Bank. It's ever since the 7th of October, the number of arrests in the West Bank, in the Palestinian territory, has crossed over 700. Even as we speak, there are protesters who've assembled after the Friday prayers. Look around me. Ambulances are already in place. These are ambulances that are coming in place. Youngsters with Palestinian flags all around are in this area. Emergency workers already in place because there already has been some incidents have taken place. The Palestinian youth here are protesting against the Israeli forces and their actions at the Gaza Strip. And over the course of the next half hour, I will get you all details of the rising anger in the Palestinian West Bank. In fact, the apprehension is this could well be the second front that Israel has to deal with after the Gaza Strip.
Israel-Hamas war gets bigger. Theatre of war expands. Now, Lebanon and Palestine borders on fire. India Today covers all war fronts.
Trouble which is expected in this part.
The most exhaustive coverage with Gaurav Sawant in the war zone.
Today is reporting from ground zero. This is Palestinian West Bank. There are several enclaves and settlements here where you have the Israeli population also. In fact, of the 300,000 people who live here, 86% are Palestinians, about 14% are Israeli settlers who have, very well protected enclaves in this area. It's almost like a military cantonment. There are separate enclaves where the Palestinians can go, areas where only Israelis stay, and of course there are then those areas where both Palestinians and Israelis can go, but then there is a lot of security in place. But right now, tension palpably high. I want to show you a report. Just when we reached the Palestinian West Bank, there wasn't a soul in sight, but the situation is fast deteriorating. It's taking a turn for the worse as Israeli forces move in a bigger way to ensure that all Hamas sleeper cells and fighters are immediately taken into custody. More ambulances are now coming in because as the protesters come close, Israeli forces target those protesters, and ambulances are then rushed in to take those protesters to the nearest hospital. We bring you this ground report. India Today is reporting from Palestine, from the West Bank, and tension is rising at this point of time. You have protesters chanting Allahu Akbar on the streets of the Palestinian West Bank as Israeli forces bring their armored personal carriers on the road. Take a look around me. You have a number of protesters, including men, women, and children all around me, and I want to walk around and show you what's happening on ground zero. Take a look. Several ambulances are now here in this area. Watch these images. Ambulances are taking those who've been injured in the action here as several tires are being burnt, and Israeli armored personal carrier came very close to this area, and suddenly there were people started running helter-skelter. But people, the youth here are wearing masks, as are little children. For example, this little child behind me, he has a Palestinian flag. He's wearing a gas mask. He's wearing a protective mask as these youngsters move forward. And watch behind me. Watch behind me as these visuals with slingshots. Some of these youngsters are moving forward and targeting the Israeli forces. Youth wearing masks right here. They're protesting. There's a fuel tanker right behind me. That fuel tanker, they're banging on the fuel tanker as a mark of protest. Several of these youngsters are carrying Palestinian flags. This is Ramallah area. occupied West Bank, and apparently there are shots that are being fired. Some people have been injured. Yes, you can see in those images, some people have been injured. Those who've been injured are being brought to the side. Watch those images as emergency vehicles rush in and take the injured to safety. The situation here is extremely tense. Israeli forces, they've surrounded this place. More and more ambulances are called in as emergency workers rush into the crowd and rescue people. Right now, the West Bank, the situation remains extremely tense as injured are rushed to hospital. This is a Friday afternoon protest. After the Friday prayers, a large number of people have come out and assembled here to protest. But watch these images behind me. Not one, not two, but multiple ambulances are out immediately trying to rescue people and taking them to safety. Sometimes watch these images as even photographers come in the line of fire, but they continue to report from ground zero. On ground zero, the situation remains very precarious. India Today is the only channel to get you these latest images of protests that are taking place in the West Bank as protesters come together and they try and target the Israeli settlement here. And where I am now, protesters have started assembling. Watch around me, you have a number of protesters and children. The parents, they've all assembled here. There are youth who are standing all over this, all around here, waiting to protest. Some of these roads have now been barricaded. So you look at the protesters, they are here in numbers, health workers who are there. And this is the road that's been barricaded completely. And there on the other side, you have ambulances that are lined up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ambulances already lined up here, because anytime now with protesters assembling here, they will try and march towards that Israeli settlement that you see behind me. That wall, behind that wall is the Israeli settlement, and this is where the protesters come in large numbers to protest. That is where the moment they come, as the Israelis put it, dangerously close to that fence, the Israeli security forces, they either fire tear gas shells or open fire with rubber bullets. The protesters here, of course, say that there are times that real bullets have also been used injuring people. In fact, it's not just that. The apprehension amongst the Israeli forces is that a very large number of Hamas fighters have infiltrated in this area, and this is where there is another pocket of resistance that is building up. Now, Israel wants to stop that, and that is why it's targeting some of these youth here. But not everybody in this part of Palestine wants to take on the Israeli forces. In fact, they are actually saying that they'd rather live in peace, they'd rather live in harmony and hope for a peaceful negotiated settlement. But Hamas, of course, is making deeper inroads, is the apprehension. But for Israel, the second front is already the Israel-Lebanon border. In fact, just about an hour ago, Israeli forces used airstrikes to target some of the Hezbollah strongholds. Israel says that Hezbollah fighters had targeted some of their posts, destroyed some of their communication equipment. Based on very specific intelligence, they mounted a swift counterattack. India Today's Ashraf Vani is on ground zero in Lebanon, and he's filed this report.
We are in a deflated position, we are in a safe position a little bit, but just 50 meters away from us, between these two sides, continuous exchange of fire there. We are able to watch it because of the height we have. Look, again, machine gun fire. This was machine gun fire, like continuous machine gun fire. You can see tracers going. Continuous fire, continuous machine gun and arty fire. Look, from both sides, both sides.
The exchange of fire on the Lebanon border is getting more regular. A sign that Israel could have to contend with a two-front war if it goes ahead with its ground invasion of Gaza. Many Hezbollah locations in South Lebanon have already been damaged in Israel's mortar shelling. Hezbollah too is striking back at Israeli army's positions from South Lebanon.
This tension is not only restricted to the land, but the Hezbollah fighters on Thursday fired a missile on the naval base in the Mediterranean Sea at Nakura, which is also behind me, visible in the visuals. There was not any report of damage in that naval base of Israel in the Mediterranean Sea.
While Hamas continues to remain a major threat, the Israeli Defense Force has warned the Lebanon-based Hezbollah group to stay away from the ongoing war.
So right now we're still striking Hamas infrastructure and senior leadership in Gaza. We are very, very determined. We're acting based on intelligence and slowly going after Hamas targets. And we're going to get to each and every one of them. We've asked civilians to move south from Gaza City, south of Wadi Gaza. We've declared a safe zone in the Moassi on the beach, and we are moving on our operational planning.
In some parts of Lebanon, civilians have already been evacuated in anticipation of hostilities.
This town with the red rooftops, this is Metula, and if you see the tower behind this, single big tower, high tower, that is Lebanon. And you can see the signboard saying Metula that side. So the Metula is there, and just 50 meters from there, the Lebanese territory starts, and that big tower or building you see, white building, is in Lebanon.
The US Embassy in Lebanon has already urged its citizens to make plans to depart as soon as possible. Clashes at the Israel-Lebanon border have now raised fears of a wider war. With Gaurav, Sawant, Rajesh Pawar and Ashrafani, Bureau Report, India Today.
So that was India Today's Rajesh Pawar reporting from the Israeli side of the Lebanon border. We also have Ashrafani reporting from Ground Zero in Lebanon. In fact, India Today has the biggest team of reporters on Ground Zero to get you a 360-degree perspective on this story. I am currently at the West Bank, Palestinian territory, where there is rising anger over Israel's targeting of Hamas strongholds at the Gaza Strip. Not everybody here supports Hamas. At the same time, they're saying that too many civilians are being killed in this crossfire between Hamas and the Israeli forces. But what is this fight all about? According to Israel, it started with 1,400 of their civilians being massacred by Hamas on the 7th of October. But this is a fight that the Palestinians say has been on for longer as they assemble here to protest Israel's targeting of civilians at the Gaza Strip. I want to cut across to India Today's Akshita Nandagopal, who gives us a brief history of the problem that is being faced here by people on Ground Zero.
The name Palestine comes from the word Philistines, which was in use many years ago, from 12th century BCE, which is when the Greeks actually owned a portion of land in what is now known as Palestine. Now, 1,000 years later, the Romans also used it when they, in fact, stretched their empire into what is now known as modern-day Syria. So for almost 2,000 years, the word Palestine wasn't used, and this despite the fact that it was very much in Arabic since the advent of Islam. In 1918, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed after the First World War and Britain had the mandate over the land, they brought Palestine back into use as separate from the adjoining territory of Jordan. By this time, there was already a sense of conflict brewing between the Arabs and the Jews. And that's courtesy an idea that was proposed by Napoleon over a century ago, that he'd give a certain portion of land as a safe house, as a territory for Jews. And that's where the seeds of this conflict essentially began. The British then tried to use it to their advantage to get support against the Ottomans. And so they too promised a Jewish territory in the Arab land. Palestine had become a distinct political entity for the first time in centuries. But they also realized one thing, that in this conflict between Palestinian Arabs and Palestinian Jews, the decision would be based on obviously the number with regards to the population and who owned more land. So that's why while the British were there, the region still saw this kind of a conflict playing out. The Jewish immigration was constant into this area. But despite that, the numbers were clearly skewed in favor of the Palestinian Arabs. Then came another world war. And as Hitler occupied Europe, began systematically killing Jews, Palestine once again became the promised land where shiploads of Jewish refugees began arriving. By the end of the war, the race was on to secure a Jewish nation on the shores of the Mediterranean. By this time, there were Jewish militias that had formed and Arabs had started to arm in self-defense. In 1947, the United Nations stepped in. They came up with a partition plan for Palestine known as Resolution 181. It led to the conflict only escalating. There was a civil war that broke out in Palestine, and so for obvious reasons, the British didn't want to get their hands dirty. They wanted out. And despite the mess, the sovereign state of Israel came into being in May 1948. And immediately, Israel was at war with its Arab neighbors. A war that Israel won. So by this time, the areas, the territories of Palestine and Israel were very clearly marked out and distinct. Palestine was West Bank and Gaza. But this clearly remained a thorn for Israel. So another war broke out, this time in 1967, when Israel occupied Palestine, occupied West Bank and Gaza. In 1964, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, had been formed in Cairo in Egypt. And under the leadership of Yasser Arafat, the PLO took up the challenge to wage constant war against the state of Israel. For the next 2.5 decades, the PLO continued to wage war against Israel. Finally, however, there was a breakthrough in 1987. That's when the PLO finally agreed and adopted the UN resolution, which meant they finally recognized the state of Israel. Matters improved and it seemed to be on the mend, but it was short-lived. By 2002, the region was again in terrible conflict. The second intifada or uprising had begun. In 2007, Israel imposed a blockade in Gaza. In 2008, Israel sent in its army into the Strip. A peace was brokered that lasted a mere 4 years. And Israel once again attacked Gaza in 2012 and once again in 2014 when bombs rained down on Gaza. A ceasefire was finally declared in August 2014. One that lasted till May 2021. And then for 11 days, there was no peace. Gunshots, arson and missiles turned this promised land into a war zone. What started with a conflict over the Al-Aqsa Mosque settled with a fragmented peace dotted with frequent firing and stone pelting till 7th October 2023, the day that war once again broke out in this region, the day that the cancer of Middle East once again turned this land into a boulevard of broken promises.